Thursdays with NAMI is our way of connecting with one another and building community and conversations around mental health. I'm really glad you're here with us tonight. So July is Minority Mental Health Mental Health Month, and this week's program, we will be chatting with my friend Latanya DuBois. She has faced numerous barriers and overcome them, and she has a really cool story to tell. I met Latanya in a program called the Leadership Fellows Academy, and that was funded through the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services and put together by NC State and UNC. The two rivals came together for a good cause to build leadership and build community for people with lived experience in the areas of mental health and addiction. So a lot of good folks in that class, and Latanya was one of them. As usual, the first part of our show will be a conversation with my esteemed guest. Then we will pause for a video of the week, and we'll follow up with your questions for the rest of the show. First, a word from our sponsors. I'm going to share their lovely video while I read this announcement. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services, and that funding comes through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant. We appreciate their guidance and support tonight, as always. Moving right along, Thursdays with NAMI is recorded. If you have friends who could not join us tonight, please let them know it is never too late. We believe in second chances at NAMI, and this program will be on YouTube within just a few days. All right, without any further ado, I'm happy to introduce Latanya DuBois. She is a mom, wife, friend, sister, educator, mentor, poet, motivational speaker, and life coach, business mentor, professional trainer with a zeal for life, and I can attest to that zeal. That only covers her waking hours. Welcome, Latanya.
Thank you so much, Peg. I'm so excited about being here. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you to NAMI for this opportunity.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. So how are you taking care of yourselves these days? It's a goofy time we're living in.
Oh, absolutely. I do a lot of diffusing and long baths, and I play with my children. I remember to have fun. That's the biggest one. Just have fun with life, because we only get one day at a time. Nothing is promised. So a lot of that, a lot of reading, a lot of studying, a lot of coaching, being there for people so I can remember how blessed I am. That's what it looks like day to day for me.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a really positive journey. There are a lot of angles to your story. Tell us your journey in a nutshell.
So I started, most of my story started around 6 years old when I had one of many traumatic experiences. My mom and dad had been struggling with being young parents and trying to raise this rambunctious little girl. And my mom was struggling with, well, I can't say struggling, I shouldn't say that, but she was experiencing drug use at that time. And I remember coming home one day and my mom was having a really bad response to her drug use. And I remember seeing blood. I remember a lot of things going on, and my dad trying to keep me from it. And because he was trying to calm the situation, it was very confusing for me as a 6-year-old. But I remember not too long after that, my dad and mom broke up. So I was raised by my mom mostly from the age of 6 to about 9. And then from 9 until many years later, my mom had a boyfriend. I called him husband, even though she wouldn't marry him. That raised me for that entire time with my dad in and out. So I experienced a lot of feelings of abandonment, frustration, hopelessness. I was the only child, so there wasn't nobody to balance some of that with. And because my mom's drug use continued for somewhere like 20 plus years from that time, there was times where I had to bring her home from drug houses. I had to bring her back to her, bring her down from her highs by myself. I would reach out to family members and ask for help, and people would tell me what to do, but nobody would come and kind of rescue me. So I usually tell people, in the normal world, whatever that is, I probably would have been taken away. I probably, if the right people would have been in the situation, I would have been removed from the home. Now, on the flip side of that, my mom was what they would call a functioning user. So she took care of me. You know, she loved me up, she spoiled me. She just was not able to provide for me emotionally and mentally because of her drug use. I'm thankful that my mom's been clean for over 25 years now. So it's not her story anymore, but that impacted my story. So by the time I was 16, I was really fed up and I ran away from home and I never looked back. I got my own place and with the help of a boyfriend. And from that point, it became like a focus. I was like, I do not want to live like this. I don't want to be crazy, you know, but I was still struggling with a lot of things. I had already had my first domestic violence relationship by that time. I had an abusive boyfriend. He wasn't physically abusive, but mentally and emotionally, which could be just as damaging. And it was just as damaging. And then I had my first child, well, my only biological child. And that became traumatic too, because I was 17 and I had him early. He was born prematurely, which led to, you know, a series of care that he had to receive while he was young, a lot of surgeries and things to that nature. But through all of that, I had to figure out a way to make life better for him. I definitely didn't want to take the journey my mom took. And because I was pregnant and needed to stop going to school, I was trying to work. My school at that time was in New York City. And I was moving to Mount Vernon, and Mount Vernon's school system was different. So I would have had to go to school for 2 more years. So that's what led to my decision to stop, because their curriculum was different. I was going into my 12th year and they were saying, no, we would have to start you at 10th because the curriculum is different. I was like, no, I'm not doing an extra 2 years. So I decided to go for my GED, and I went through a program that was, I want to say it was like a trade, but they did more than that. They taught you like life skills. There was Addressed to Success. It wasn't called that then, but it was Addressed to Success program. They taught you how to interview. They gave you like the whole package, and I did that to get my GED. And then from there, continued my educational career and got into nonprofit work, and decided to just take advantage of as many opportunities as I could to climb the ladder to the point where I was able to balance enough for me to take care of my son.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So a couple things come to mind for me. One is that as a child, you were essentially a caretaker.
Absolutely.
Right. We have many caretakers in NAMI. NAMI was founded by caretakers, parents, sort of the opposite of your situation. But yeah, and the other is that GED program that sounds incredibly holistic. You've always struck me as someone who presents well and seems really positive. Do you feel like the seed was planted there, or was it something else?
I think the seed was planted well before that. I have a very large family on my mom's side, and my mom's side had 8 women. So 8 aunts, including my mom, and then 2 uncles. So I had a lot of powerful women in my family, very resilient, educated, uh, showed enormous amount of tenacity. So they modeled it. Even though they didn't sit with me all the time and talk about it, they definitely modeled it. So I knew I had limited choices to just give up because I saw them do so much in life. So I think it started there. My grandmother on my mom's side was the same way. My grandmother on my father's side was a little different. She was a little more Afrocentric. So I got some of my understanding of what it meant to be a Black woman from her. Some of it, I wasn't around her that much, but when I was, it was the epitome of what it meant to be a strong Black woman, like the quotes you put around that. So I learned a lot of that from her. So by the time I got to that age where I said, I'm going to do this, I have to do this, I didn't have anybody to care for, like a child or anything. So it was really about me just doing what I see everybody else doing, going after something different and getting out of a bad situation, what I felt was a bad situation for me, so that I can thrive, because I couldn't take the depression and the suicidal thoughts and the frustration and the loneliness anymore. So I needed something to change.
So say more about the depression and suicidal thoughts. What did that look like? When did it hit you? How did you get past all that?
Most of it was, it was subtle because in my community, especially when I was around 7 to like 12 years old, the community we grew up in was very poverty stricken. Most of the individuals that lived in the building where I lived and we lived in a tenement. So it's 5 floors essentially with many families in it. And most of us were on welfare to some degree. There was working families there, but most of the children were families that were single family homes. Some were, multiple families, but both father and mother was there, but it was very diverse. Some grandparents was raising the children. It was very diverse. A lot of step families. So we kind of grew up with the mindset that, we band together. And I seen a lot of dysfunction in that community. And one of the things about New York City that as I grew and learned in school about systemic issues, when you were on welfare, if your parent was still on welfare when you turned 18, you automatically was put on your own case. You didn't have to apply, you didn't have to try, you just got welfare too. And the norm was have children and stay on welfare. That was like a norm, which is concerning because nobody was really promoting otherwise. I would have to be outside of my immediate community for the most part to hear something different. And that was school for me. There was a lot of teachers who recognized my educational level, but what depression looked like for me was fighting, a lot of anger, and then like slipping down into crying spells, a lot of fighting, blackouts. There was times where I had thoughts of just taking a lot of pills. I just wanted to die. I prayed a lot for God to take me away, like just take me now. And I begged to like just let it end, because it was times where it just didn't feel like I can do it anymore. Like I was just over it. And because I was so young, no matter who I told that to, it just didn't resonate for them. If I said, I don't feel happy, I don't feel well, go outside, go play, get some air. But, now I know as a trauma-informed practitioner to pay attention when a child is acting out, or when they are, I don't even call it acting out, but when they are displaying certain behaviors. So that's how my depression manifested. It would look like, anger.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's an aspect of depression that a lot of us overlook, is that anger, that irritability. You can't sleep. I couldn't get along with anybody when my depression was really bad and untreated. So that resonates with me a lot.
Yes.
It took me a long time to realize that if everyone around me was a jerk, I should probably rethink who the problem actually was.
Right.
So yeah, and the sadness too, but definitely that's a piece that is easy to forget.
Yes.
So I know you have some personal experience with social services, community mental health. And I want to mention, by the way, I'm glad that you found a different way out. I can understand how the incentives in your environment pointed to, just have a kid, just accept this payment that they sign you up for automatically.
Yes.
But most people do the path of least resistance. So it's wonderful that you were able to find another way. But how did those institutions affect you?
So there was a lot of biases, right? When I was in my earlier parts after I got pregnant, because when you get pregnant, that's another platform for you to get your own case. And when I got pregnant, I was immediately told to just go down, talk to this worker and do this paperwork, and they'll start sending you food stamps, and you'll get your Medicaid for your pregnancy, and you'll do this and you'll do that. So I was following what I was told. And when I would go there, thinking back, and especially I go and speak to women, young women quite often, because I remember sitting in those waiting rooms and they would make you sit there for hours in a day. hours. And when you would ask, like, why am I waiting so long to fill out one form? They would just tell you, well, where else you got to go? You don't got nothing else to do but make babies. Or, the way they would speak to you was like as if you had no future, no positive future. And I always joke because my worker's name was Miss Payne. And I really felt like that's what she was, a pain. And I just didn't respond to her. I knew that somehow she was going to see me on the other side of this. So I tried not to respond, but they would yell at us, not necessarily directly at me, but the workers, supervisors, like, we'll come in, they'll tell you to come in 9:30, you're sitting in a dirty space. There's no food, the bathroom is dirty, and you could be there all day. And this was the system for as long as I can remember. Even up until when I became a case manager, this was the same system. So we're talking easily 20 years of seeing it, and it didn't shift. The room would be gloomy. There was no, now you see all these inspirational things on the wall when you go into certain social services buildings, but it was grayish white walls. It was very depressing. So if you were already low, and we know how the 8 dimensions of wellness works, so our environmental wellness is important too. And you walk in here and you spend hours somewhere, and then someone tells you you're nothing, and you have to deal with certain things to get money. You start to believe it. You can start to believe that. So that was one way. And then with the healthcare system, if you was a young mom, the expectation for you to be able to care for your child properly was not there. So when I found out, I didn't find out my son's diagnosis until he was 8 months almost. And that was haphazardly. And when I confronted them, like, well, how did this happen? Because he was actually already getting physical therapy and occupational therapy. And they told me it was because he was a preemie. And I happened to be sitting on that one-way mirror thing where you can see them, but they can't see you. And I saw his chart in front of me, and I looked at it, and I saw the word spastic diplegia. And I said, what the heck is that? So I never heard of it. I'm just kind of looking around, and I happened to see a book that says spastic diplegia. So I opened it, and I'm looking at, what does this mean? And it said cerebral palsy. And I said, what? So one of the nurses was passing by, and I was like, excuse me, what does this mean? And why is it in my son's chart? And the face was like, I can't tell you that. Let me get somebody that can tell you that. And the worker came back with another worker, and then and I said, so what's happening? Oh, mommy, we just want to, your son has a condition that, and I said, yeah, he's premature, so his motor system is slow. And they're like, yes, but there's a name that we call. I said, what is cerebral palsy? And they said, well, this is when a brain injury occurs. And I'm like, what? So I'm like, wait, whoa, this is too much information. So I said, well, why wasn't I told about this? And another fact about my mom was she was a incredible advocate. Like, a lot of my smarts comes from my mom. A lot of my strategy mine comes from my dad. But my mom was a passionate advocate. So I knew my rights. So when I realized that they hadn't told me something, I got up and I said, where's your manager? And it was like, what? I said, well, it's the social worker manager. Let's get her. Just calm down, mom. And I'm like, I'm not upset. I got up, went to get my son out of the thing, the playroom. It's like, well, mom, if you don't have him in care, he'll never walk, he'll never run, he'll never do this. And I'm just looking at them like, yeah, but okay, let me speak to the manager. So by the time I get my son together and I'm getting into the hallway, I'm leaving like the clinic area, the social worker comes out and says, I understand that you're upset. Do you want to speak for a moment? I said, sure. I just want to find out who's in charge of this department, because I plan to write a letter about what I experienced and that you didn't disclose the treatment plan that you had for my son. So mind you, I'm only about 18 by this time, because I turned 18 a few months after he was born. And she looks at me and says, well, with mothers like you. And I said, what does that mean, mothers like you? And she said, teenage moms, sometimes they don't come back for care if we tell them certain things. I said, yeah, but that's treating everybody the same. I'm a different person from who you may have treated. Yeah, but we're worried about the kids. I said, that's okay, no problem. I got her name and I left. And it became a battle after that. I actually sued that hospital. But it was demeaning, it was condescending, it was frustrating, and it spiraled me, because now I had to catch up. I didn't know what was happening with my son. I didn't have the proper education about anything. and I felt confused. And his dad was part of his life and my life. We were still together at that time, but it was too much for both of us because nobody really equipped us, and he had been doing this thing with them for a while. So those, and then when he did go back to care and things like that, when he got into school, the school system assumed that because he had a physical disability that he couldn't function cognitively. So they always made assumptions and put him in classes that deteriorated his ability to understand stuff because he was mocking what he was seeing in the class. So I had to advocate to get him into classes that were appropriate for his cognitive ability. So I've had quite a struggle with systems over the course of my lifetime that has shown me that people just don't see who they're servicing. They think they got it because they have a certain stature in a business, and they assume everybody's the same, which is very detrimental to a person, and especially a person that has a trauma history. So there was a lot that happened during that time, and that was most of my experiences. It happened in school here and there when I was in high school, but my mom took care of that, so I didn't have to do it firsthand a lot, but most of those systems were broken because they just didn't get it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you experienced the opposite of person-centered care.
Absolutely.
Which is terrible. And I wonder, and I imagine you wonder, what would have happened if you hadn't been there paying attention, reading your son's chart?
Right, exactly.
Wow.
I was loud.
Yeah, so you've got deep roots as an advocate, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've learned from watching, and most of my family was like that. I have quite a few aunts that's like that. My grandfather, whew, yeah, he sued a few places for that, but so
Um,
yeah, I learned pretty quickly from them.
yeah, that's amazing and good for you. So, and if you're in our virtual studio audience and you're not familiar with person-centered care, it is the opposite of what Latanya got at that point. Person-centered care is care tailored to the individual that sees the person as a person and wraps services around that person in a way that makes sense for them.
Yes,
It's all about dignity and respect.
yes, very inclusive process.
All right. Well, I'm glad that you advocated and that you're here with us tonight. You've overcome quite a lot. Not everyone would go from having a GED to earning a master's, from growing up with some poverty and challenges with your parents, then to starting a successful business. What do you think allowed you to succeed where some others might have become stuck?
Um, who I had around me, I think being seen is a big issue in our society. Most people don't pay attention to those that may be experiencing some stuff that they don't know how to speak about, or their culture has taught them not to speak up about, because there's quite a few cultures out there that says what happens at home stays at home, and privacy and secrecy is like king in the household. So it really can be damaging. So being able to feel and connect to someone else's pain or silence or struggle became a big passionate part for me, because that's what people did for me. I have a program, like a project I do called Be the One Believer, because it was always one person who saw me for me and always poured into me like time and effort. And that's why I do it with so many people, because I think it's so necessary, especially in a high pressure society that we live in here, where there's like achievement and you got to do this and you got to be a certain way. You got to go to college. You got to graduate. You got to be a great mom, a great wife, a great husband, and there's so much pressure for so many people, especially for young folks. So it was just a matter of exposure. Once I got exposed to certain things, it changed what I thought. I really did think my community was it. I really thought that was it. Everybody grew up here, everybody did this here, and there was no out. And something different happened in my life when I started going different places with different people, and seeing that there was something else to see, even if it was a train ride, because that's really what it was. Me and my friends actually started going down to Manhattan in New York, and I realized that the buildings looked different, and it looked more affluent there, and I was able to like aspire to something, and it looked there was joy, even if they were miserable, possibly. I didn't feel that when I was there, and I wondered what that was. What was that thing that let people shop freely, or be in beautiful homes, or wear nice outfits, or eat in nice restaurants? I didn't know what that was that way, but I know my dad had always taken me to the Rockettes every year, so we would get dressed up for that. He would take me to plays, so there was exposure to show me that there was different things out there. And I think that's what people need. They need to see that there's options. There's other ways you can do this.
So was your father that primary influence, or there were a number of people who showed you a different world and showed you a path that you could take?
Yeah, I would say it was my dad. I think it was quite a few people because my grandmother did it. My family that I talked about that lived in Mount Vernon, my aunt used to live in what's called the projects in New York, and she moved into a house, and she was a pretty big deal in her corporate world. And I would go there, and she was the equivalent for me to Felicia Rashad in The Cosby Show. She looked like her. She had the spunk like her. She was no joke like her. So when I saw her and she was close to me in proximity to what, if I wanted to ask her a question or see life in her view, I could, which is very important to me. Like, I don't necessarily only believe in teaching your children about people that's not close in proximity. Like, you should be like Oprah. It has to be somebody close that they can go talk to and sit in their space and see, for them to, really connect to the idea that this is possible for me sometimes. So my dad was the start, but I think there was a lot of people in our community that was exposed to different things and would show us stuff. But it wasn't until I got out on my own that I ventured with friends, when I was able to travel to, down to the Manhattan area and stuff like that, that I was able to see, oh my goodness, what is all of this? When I was little, it didn't make sense to me. I just felt like I was in like a time warp when I was with my dad, because I would just be playing. I didn't know I was in Manhattan. I just knew I was going somewhere nice with him, but I didn't know what that was.
Okay. So shifting gears a little bit, tell me about being a mother of 7 kids.
Yeah.
You must have some stamina.
Yeah, it takes a lot of that, and an incredible partner. Oh my God, my wife is amazing because she's the bulk of the nurturer. I'm more of the provider and the disciplinarian, and every now and then I'm doing what I just said, exposing them to something, expanding their understanding of life so that they can have more options. But 7 children is comprised of 1 biological child, because I can only do that pain once in life. It was just, it was not the best thing ever to experience. Having him was great, but the pain was not. Then I have 3 stepchildren, and then we adopted 3 girls as a result of foster care. So we were foster parents for 5 years, and ended up being their parent full-time as an adoptive parent after we got the ones that we adopted. The young ladies were 2 months when we got one of them. One we actually got straight from the hospital. Like, they wheeled Tawana out because that was their policy, that the mom had to leave with the baby in their lap on the wheelchair. So that was one. And then the other one was 7 months going. She was really close to 8 months when we got her.
Wow. Right on. So full house must be amazing at holidays.
Yes. It's challenging because, that's one of the things that we are doing, from the Leadership Fellowship. Is that what it is?
LFA, Leadership Fellows Academy.
Fellows Academy. Thank you. I know that sounded weird. So that was one of the things I got from there. We have been huge advocates for blended families since we started, and we've been together over 20 years. We've been friends over 25 years. So we got our own experience of what it's like to be a blended family, and as well as being a family that gets reunited. So we had our own challenges as step parents, right, with our children and coming together. And then we witnessed challenges and supported some families being reunified. Even though we ended up adopting, we did have quite a few families that got the chance to get back together. and we supported that process, but there's limited resources and support for those family members to thrive, you know, after they've gotten their children back. So that's a big piece for us, because we know that familial dysfunction is common, more common than people know or want to admit to, but it's also the source of, you know, healthy relationships if it's done right. You know, you can recover from things that may have happened in the family, or just how life functions. Life is not always fair. We have losses and gains, ebbs and flows. So, so that was huge for us, just trying to get that balance. So it's not completely, you know, roses.
Life on life terms, right?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, we've created different mechanisms to touch base with our kids, because now they're the first four, we call them the first generation, and our last three is the second generation. So the first generation is 22 and older. So we have annual retreats with just the family that we conduct, that allows us to touch base and talk about things and process together, so that we know what's going on with each other, and we create a safe space for that. And our extended family has come to that, like Tawana's brother, or, you know, people that's married into the family. And that has been the epitome of what we wanted to do for other families, because when you have a family that comes together, and you have different last names or different parents, you got bonus family members and stuff like that, you know, you have to create some kind of unique bond that keeps the family strong. So that's what we focused on, and that's how we got the name Dewberry that you see in different places for us, because we combined our last names and made it so that we represent a unit that we can be proud of, so that it would be harder to break us down, because society doesn't always understand our family unit, if that makes sense.
Right. I did notice your Facebook page had Dewberry, and I thought, well, that's pretty close to Du Bois. I didn't realize there was a story there, but that makes perfect sense.
Yes.
So I know you just mentioned Tawana, and you've mentioned a source of strength for you is having a long-term partner. You always seem comfortable sharing that your spouse is a woman. Was it a process getting to that point? Were you in the closet at one time?
Yeah, I definitely was. I didn't know that it was such a thing as that, though. So I knew when I was very young, I would say at least as young as 8, that I was attracted to women. I knew that. But through the course of church and certain things in our community, there was actually a woman that was gay in our community. I didn't know that was a thing then, that was called that then, but I remembered how they treated her. She was more masculine. So I remember how they treated her and talked about her, made fun of her. So I do remember it being a shame associated with it. And I do remember having feelings for a friend of mine, and inadvertently being rejected for my feelings. I didn't tell her how I felt, but I alluded to it, and she said something that made me go, "Ooh, I'll never say that again." Right? So I definitely stuffed it. That was another source of my depression too, and anxiety, because I was not living fully for me. I was hiding a part of me, and I had suppressed it enough to where I thought, if I just did it the way people told me to do it, get married, have a child, even to the degree that when I wasn't married when I got with, when I had my son, but I remember being in the labor room, and my aunt, we're rushing around, and I was in the room, and they was going out to get the IV from my hand, and she rushed over to me. She took her wedding band off and put it on my finger and said, "They'll respect you more." I remember that. She pat my hand like this. She said, "They'll respect you more." And I'm 17, and that stuck with me. Like, even if I had some notion that I wanted to be in a different situation, I wasn't going to get respected. So it was really deep down inside. So when I did start, being with Tawana, and we were friends first. We were very close friends first. I didn't know what the feeling was, and I didn't ask for the feeling. I wasn't seeking the feeling then. I didn't even acknowledge it as that. It almost happened. Well, it did happen organically. And it was, when it happened, it was like, no, I can't feel that. And it was just a friendship for a long time, but I knew I had fell for her. And then I was like, I couldn't tell nobody. But by that time I was very boisterous and, strong-minded. So it was going to come out at some point. And the funny part was when we did start telling family, they was like, well, we knew that. It's like, oh, well, we didn't know that you knew that we knew. Like, well, so we thought we should tell you. So yeah, I don't know that I had in the closet for that. But once that happened, once I accepted that that's who we were, to some degree, it still was hard to show public affection. It was still hard to dress the way I wanted to dress, speak about her. It was my friend, so in the closet in that way. And once I understood what that was, it was like, oh, yes. Okay, I have been in the closet. Not wanting to tell jobs who I was. When we moved down to North Carolina, I had to do my interview over the phone. And when I spoke to them, I told them nothing of who I was in terms of relationship until they told me they wanted me to come for the second interview. And that's when they said, oh, do you have, will you be bringing family? We'll help, with accommodation or anything. And it was like, I was like, yeah, I have some, children and my partner's coming. And when I got there, it was like 17 million gay folks in the agency. So I was like, oh, look at here. And I was so worried because, by then I'm wearing like masculine clothes because it's a preference, but it doesn't always translate as I want to be a man. It's just my comfort zone for expression. So when I was going to the interview, I was like, oh my God, they're not gonna like me because of my clothes. And when I walked in there and I saw what I saw, it was other women just like me. It was so engaging and welcoming. I was just shocked. And I knew then that I couldn't hide any more of me anymore. So from that point on, I just lived. And whatever it was, it had to be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. It's so important to see people who look like you and to feel and know on that deep level that you're accepted.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if people realize how hard it would be to be in the closet and how often you mention your spouse and your kids and the person's name, the one that you love. So it is a big piece of yourself to have to hide. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. All right. So one thing that you taught me about was trauma-informed care. I had heard of it and had a sense of what it was before we were together in the class, but you always seem to bring it up at a time when I wouldn't have thought of it. So talk about trauma-informed care. What is it? Why is it important to you?
So trauma-informed care is a practice by which providers are trained to identify when someone may have experienced a traumatic experience, when they may have had a traumatic experience, I should say, and approach that service with care, understanding that this person must have been traumatized at some point. And when you get trained around trauma-informed practices, you start to recognize signs and symptoms that people display as a result of their trauma. Certain body language, certain outwardly behaviors, or they may just straight up tell you, I was molested when I was 4 till 25, or I was beaten in my family, or, something like that may have happened. And what this allows the provider to do is provide a safe space, because individuals who have had a traumatic experience don't process the same. Some will be functioning in the same age psychologically, cognitively, as when the trauma happened. So you may be working with a 40-plus-year-old person, but that trauma has them stuck at like 20 or 18 or 15 or even younger. So if you don't understand that that's happening, your expectation of how they'll progress, which is why person-centered approaches is so important, if you can't move them from one place to another, you have to be able to use certain tactics and tools to help them identify that trauma. There's so many little things you can learn, emotional coaching and understanding the cognitive triangle, and just all these little things that will help you identify what could be happening with that person. Even just the simplest thing. I'll give you a quick example. I used to teach a risk reduction and harm reduction education class. And we had people from all walks of life that was coming for 8 weeks and they would go through this series of exercises with me to learn how to reduce their use of drug use, or also reduce the likelihood of contracting HIV, right? So we had this one guy who had been in who had been in a residential facility before for his drug use. And we were about to do an activity. I used to infuse art and drama therapy into my sessions. So I had came in and put out a pad with a pencil, number 2 pencil on the table when they, setting up the room. He came in. Now, this guy before that was incredible. He was a participatory. He would help me. He was a lot of fun. But that day he came in and he sat down at his desk, and I remember seeing him, but sit down and look a little different. So I was like, maybe he's not having a good day. He'll warm up. And he just sat back and put his arms like this, and he just looked at me like he was going to leap up and kick me or something. So, I went on about the morning, asked everybody how they were doing. And as I was doing that, I noticed his face was squinching up more and more. So I was like, so, how are you doing today? And he was like, I don't want to be here. And I was like, why? What happened? And he said, I know what this is. And I said, what you mean? He said, I know what you're about to do. I know what this means. And he picks up the pencil and he tosses it. And I'm like, what? He's like, you're about to confront me. So see, there's a scenario in some NA practices where they put you in the middle of a room and every person in a circle around you will give you feedback about something you had to do. And you would have to write it down, and you had a pad and a pencil. So he automatically assumed that we were going to do that. And that was a very tough time in his life. So he shut down. This was, like I said, he was the total opposite. So luckily I was trained to identify, okay, something triggered him. And now he's in that space and he doesn't recognize that we're here right now. So I have to approach this differently to keep him engaged. And that's what trauma-informed practices can do for you, is to make you see that this person has gone back to that traumatic experience and they're not dealing with you for today. So you're gonna have to shift a little bit to engage them appropriately and keep them in a space to feel safe enough to move forward with the process. So that's what I would define it as.
That is a great example. Thank you for that. I was trying to think of one as I wrote up our questions and prepared mentally for our conversation, because in our class, some situation would come up where we were talking about how you help someone, and you were always the one who would say, well, if this person has trauma, that question won't work. Right. So that was a perfect example.
Yes, words, smells, spaces, colors on the wall. You would be amazed, not you, because I know you're in the field, but people would be amazed at, just what can trigger us. Most of us don't even know we're triggered and we're already there and we don't understand. I usually tell clients that I work with, or just people, family members, if you go 0 to 20 on any issue and you can't understand why, then it's a historical factor to that. That's back when you had an experience and you're bringing it forward to this moment. And I need you to know that that's not what's happening right now first. So let's figure out why you feel this way. And that usually helps people to realize, oh, I don't have to be angry right now. It's not happening again necessarily. So that same little girl that every time I took my son somewhere, I was worried about them saying, you're not old enough to make the right decisions for his health. I would hurry up and get mad so you wouldn't challenge me about my son's care, which was my response because of my trauma. So it took a special physician or a special therapist, a physical therapist or whatever, to identify that and say, Mom, you're doing wonderful. Whatever you say you want to do with your son, they had to learn that about me. But I didn't know that I was responding that way until I got into this field. And I was like, oh, so that's why I would be so and mad before I even got there. And they didn't do anything to me, but I was ready just in case,
Right. And it's kind of a relief, as you alluded to, when you're triggered and you realize, oh, I don't have to feel this way. Mm-hmm. I'm not under attack at this point in my life. That's great.
Yes. Yeah. And you have somebody safe. And the only thing I will say, because I don't like to leave this out, some people will be trained for trauma-informed practices, but you got to understand something about that too, is that once you open up that space for them, they need to consistently be in that space. You can't create that safe space for them today And then next time they're in a space where they need to talk, you violate them by saying something like, oh, well, you know, we don't have time today. You'll have to speak to such and such, who doesn't know the scenario. So you know how you might have a therapist for a while and then you get a new therapist, or you might have a worker or someone that's been working with you on certain things, a doctor or whomever, and you get a new person and you feel jilted. That's kind of how it feels when you've opened up with someone and told them like the deepest, darkest secret that you ever had, and then they're gone and you have to deal with somebody else. That's another piece of being trauma informed. You can't take them to this deep place and then say, great, now I hope everything is great with you, see you in about a month, or never see you again, because that's very damaging and it can be worse for the person as well.
Mm-hmm. That is a really important piece, that safe space is a vulnerable space, and it's so important. It's sacred, really.
Yes.
I see some comments from our chat box. Amen to that. And so, yeah, lots of support out there in the chat box.
And Gary's doing awesome with the linkages to resources. I love it.
Yeah, Gary is always there for us on Thursdays. So thank you for that. Tell me one last question before we move into our video. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is my belief in God. I'm reminded there's things that I don't understand. The thunder I just heard, the lightning, the trees, the birds, the sky. There's something I don't understand. So when it's really bad for me, that's what I hold on to. There's something bigger than me. I went to an Oprah session once, and the one of the people that was speaking, I forgot his name. He's a pastor, but Rob Bell, I think his name is. And he said, you know, we are a speck in the universe, in the bigger scheme of things. We are a speck on a little green and blue ball that's spinning sideways 100,000 times a minute. So, you know, put that in perspective, that's how little we are in the scheme of the universe. And when I heard that, it was like, right? So when I'm thinking I'm in the worst case scenario, there's always somebody that may be in a worse situation than me. And I hold on to the gratefulness. Like, I have this, I have that, I have this, I have that. My children, youth give me a lot of hope. Their resiliency, no matter what they go through. And definitely myself, you know, just what I've experienced. I'm reminded that I've gone through a lot and I've made it through a lot. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm reminded that I can be strong. I can be weak if I need to. I can be vulnerable, but I can also be powerful and encouraging and supportive and excited and loved. So those are the you know, the yin and yang I deal with day to day.
Well, that is a perfect note to end on. Gary pulled up the book Love Wins. That's a beautiful title right there. So now we're going to pivot to our video of the week. And this is where I give my shout outs to our behind the scenes helpers, our awesome intern, Eddie Simmons, who actually created our video for the week. And Gary Kreitz, of course, our executive director, who is always there to give us support. So the star of this week's video is Ella, Eddie's dog. And since tonight is about overcoming obstacles, that's what this video is going to show as well. All right. So that was fun. That was something different.
Yeah.
and showed off Eddie's amazing video editing skills. We keep our video of the week a little bit light. Usually it's Roxy, our office mascot, my Beagle mix, but tonight we had Ella. All right, so now it's time for your studio audience questions. Virtual studio audience, please type your questions into the Q&A box. If you're new to Zoom and haven't done that before, you want to look towards the bottom, sort of left of your monitor. There's an icon that says Q&A with a couple of air bubbles. If you type your question there, click on that, type your question, and it will magically appear to us, and we will answer your questions. Latanya and I'll be there for backup. Since you mentioned a really good book already, oh, here's one. Do you offer workshops or services for family preservation?
Yes, I do. I actually just started a nonprofit and we're going to be promoting, it's called Forever Bonded. It will be online, and I'm going to be doing a webinar really soon to talk to families about what they would like to see us doing. But we do workshops for blended families. We also do it for reunification of families and helping parents that are becoming foster parents or adoptive parents learn some tips and tricks to coping with children who have recovered, is in recovery from trauma.
All right. Well, there's something to look forward to. I'm sure you've got a lot of exciting things coming down the pike.
Yes.
Are there any other, aside from what you mentioned, books or songs or movies that lift you up that you
Yes,
recommend?
so I had wrote down, because I know that was one of the things we talked about. There's quite a few books, so I'm just going to give you some, and you tell me if it's too many and I need to stop, because there's some that completely turned my life around. So one is called, it's kind of old, you might have to look for it in a library or online, but it's called The Big Leap. The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, Gay Hendricks. And it's a book talking about how trauma impacts you and stops you from going after what you want in life. So The Big Leap, right? It's a very insightful book to help you identify where trauma may be holding you back. So it's awesome. Yeah, awesome, Gary. Gosh, I love Gary. Okay, the next one that is really good that talks about how trauma plays out, and sometimes we manifest different symptoms and signs in us that now is showing biological connections, genetic connections to. It's called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolynn, and it's Wolynn. He, just to give you a little sneak peek, he talks about how when a grandmother has experienced a traumatic experience, that the mother and the grandchild is in the grandmother's womb during that time. So the trauma passes through to the other generations, which is like, what? But he gives you things to be able to identify that, right? When it's not your trauma that you're carrying, and where maybe generational practices that you've adapted to. So that was huge for me, because there was things that I was carrying that was not mine. And I had to differentiate between my sadness and a sadness that I was carrying for someone else that may come up as guilt or shame or something. Another great one is Harmonic Wealth. And it's by James Arthur Ray. It's another kind of sort of hard to get, but you can get it on Amazon. And that one talks about the 5 pillars of wealth that you can focus on, similar to the 8 dimensions of wellness, where it just highlights how you start to manifest change in your life, like really focusing on the law of attraction, but also like digging into your higher self, like really who you connected to. For me, is God. And I study many religions and many beliefs and spiritual practices, and that has helped me understand things on a different level, especially when you're talking about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you're in that ascension space and you understand who you are. You want to know more. And then my final strong store recommendation is Who Moves My Cheese? I love that book. It's like, I can read, and it's a quick read. So it's like 10 times the impact with just telling you how important it is to pay attention to what's going on in your day to day, especially if you're in the nonprofit world.
Absolutely. I do love Who Moved My Cheese. I actually sat in a bookstore and just read the whole thing. It's pretty brief.
Yes.
I recommend that. Support your local bookstore.
Right.
I was young. But
Right.
basically, it's about the who's going to find the cheese quicker, the mouse or the human?
Right.
And the mouse actually runs around trying to find the cheese, and the human sits around saying, "Who moved my cheese?"
Right. Complaining.
Exactly. I had a boss once who her biggest insult to anybody would be to say, "You know, all you do is sit around saying, 'Who moved my cheese?'"
Right. You got to get up and do something different and try to get what you want. So,
Right.
yes. So those are some big ones for me.
Those are good ones. So go ahead, virtual studio audience, give us your questions. We do sometimes end the show at 8 if that's where the energy takes us, but we'd love to spend more time with you and with Latanya. So type your questions in there. Here's one.
Yeah.
How do you help a loved one who is dealing with depression without being sucked in yourself?
That's a good one. So I'll give you both perspectives from the caregiver side, because I've had family members who were dealing with depression. Give them space, but be present. Sometimes don't approach it as you have to fix something, because that's not what's happening. They're not broken in the way that you can fix them. So you may
Mhm.
have to give them space and just see what they need from you. It may just be, come hang out with me, don't say nothing. It may just be, bring me my favorite foods and then leave. It could be, come watch a movie with me and we laugh and joke and don't talk about what's happening in my life. So really just allow them to move through it and be present for them. Um, and how I would take it from the space of not being sucked in is recognizing that that's their journey. That's the hardest part, because we want people to feel better and we want to be there for them and we want to help them. But there's a selfish side to it sometimes, because parts of our ego wants to be the one that fixed it for them. And it's very important to recognize that this is their journey. And even though it's difficult to watch, I've had a lot of family members, especially my children, when they were going through something hard, I would want to jump in and take it on and let me just do it. I can do it like my mom would do, like the advocates in me. But then they don't get to grow from it. And they don't learn how to thrive. They become dependent. And it's important to give them that freedom. And it's important for you and your self care to recognize when you're starting to feel depleted after you talk to them, or when you feel like you're tired all the time and you almost don't want to be bothered with them. That compassion fatigue starts to come in, and you hate answering their phone call. Pay attention to those things, because it's not your responsibility. And depression is a serious illness, and sometimes it's more than just you talking to them. They may need other interventions, and you just have to be gentle with that process. That's what my suggestions would be. And from the side of the person that needs it, I think that when I was going through my depression moments, what was important to me is with those things I just told you, somebody just coming by, saying, hey, even if I'm not answering the phone, leaving a message that's encouraging. For when I come out of my slump, I have something to look forward to, sending me something nice. Depending on how close they are to you, it's really their journey. And it's hard to hear that, but it's a truth. It's for them to figure it out.
Mhm. As you were talking about the caregiver side, what came to my mind is the pressure a person feels when they are the only source of support, or maybe I'm the only person where they actually feel safe and
Mhm.
comfortable in their own skin. And how do you kind of answered it, but the process of managing that pressure and setting boundaries is really tough.
That's that, you said the key word right there, setting boundaries, paying
Mhm.
attention to you too. Because if you're getting exhausted trying to help them, then you're not really helping them. You really just created more codependency, because you're getting something out of doing things for them and they're getting something out of you doing things for them. But nobody is really healing in that situation.
Mhm.
You see, nobody is moving towards recovery in that situation. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to what it is that they really need in that moment, and helping them to identify that, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And then having options, look for resources and be prepared to share it. Sometimes it's just a walk outside. Sometimes it's shaking them up enough just to say, come on, let's go take a walk. And if they feel up to it, doing it, but not being so overbearing that, and I guess I shouldn't say that, because the part that you said that sticks out for me a little bit, Peg, is the part where you're the only person. Be careful, because sometimes a person can be using that so that they don't move towards the hard part, which is healing. That's hard. Healing is hard. It's hard work. So they don't want to face those places that hurt. And that's the part that you have to be there to support them through, but you don't have to do it for them. So setting those boundaries is very important.
Yeah. And what you just said that really resonated with me just now is that balancing act. I live with depression, and that question of how do I know when I'm honoring my need for rest, I'm honoring my need to just have downtime, versus if I push myself, I will actually feel better later. I find that so difficult.
It is, because I struggle with my depression quite a bit too. And one of the things that I learned from Tawana, she's such a quiet strength for me. And the accountability I get because with depression, you ebb and flow really badly sometimes, right? You get the low lows. And she helps me be able to see myself in those spaces, because sometimes I don't even know I'm in it, because something may have triggered it and I don't know. So I had to do the work of identifying my triggers. And it's something called a RAP plan that helped me do that. The RAP plan is traditionally used for people who use substances. That's what it was designed for. But it helps with any person in any situation, especially if you're going through recovery, because it helps you to identify when you're not well. And I think most of us in society right now don't know our signs when we're not well. We just continue to push. And then we don't understand why we're super, super angry, or super, super irritable, or super, super tired, or down, or depressed, or sad. We don't get it because we don't recognize those early signs. So, learning that about, and if you know somebody that's going through depression, get a trauma-informed practice training. Do something that will educate you on recognizing certain things, and learn small things you can do to help the person find their path of recovery, whatever it may be: therapy, church, going to a group, something to that nature. But the RAP plan is really a great tool, because it's very simple to fill out, and you can share it with family members, and you do it when you feel your best and you're more balanced, so that when it does start to teeter away from that, they know what that looks like for you, because you've had a conversation and thought about, well, I know that when my bills are late, I start to get that anxiety, and then it makes me sad that I can't pay my bills, and that I'm in this space and I'm done. And I can't say that to you at that time, because I'm in my space at that moment. But if I know that, and people start to see me shutting down, so me and Tawana actually sat and did our RAP plans. And now we know, like, all right, come on away from that. Let's talk about it while it's still open and opportunity for us to talk. Because once I'm in my depressive space, I'm not going to want to talk about it. I don't even know that I'm in it sometimes. So I'm definitely not going to open up.
Right. And that bill example is a good one, because there's an element of shame. Sometimes there's an element of shame, or layers of shame, depending on the subject and the diagnosis. Right. And Gary has faithfully written a wellness recovery action plan and posted a link. So if you'd like to learn more about that.
And I would always promote the 8 dimensions of wellness on SAMHSA's website. That's another great tool to learn if you're dealing with someone that has depression or anxiety, helping them identify the other dimensions of their life, because that's just one dimension, emotional. If they start to see the other pieces, because like I said, everything triggers you, right? Smells, tastes, colors. So you might be able to help them see other ways to change their environment so they can cope better.
And that's SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. And of course, Gary's right there with the link.
Yes.
It's faster than a speeding bullet tonight.
It is. I'm loving it. I am loving it.
Best chat box ever.
Yeah, I've never seen it this fast, and I've been in a lot of these.
Yeah. So Tell me about your doctoral program. You're working on a PhD.
Yes, so I'm getting a PhD in metaphysical counseling. Our bodies are amazing. We have like the most intricate systems in in any well, maybe not than trees, but definitely than anything else. And our biological makeup is so phenomenal that it reads as something we may think it is, but it may be telling us something about our spiritual health, right? So pain, like pain in your shoulder, for example, pain in this upper, neck where people get tension at, can really mean that you're carrying too much of a load. You need to sit down and take some things off your plate. You feel like you're carrying a burden on your own. So metaphysical science talks about things that manifest in our bodies based on what we are going through emotionally. Simplest things you can literally say in Google right now: what is the metaphysical signs of metaphysical reasons for knee pain? What's the metaphysical reason for neck pain? And they'll tell carpal tunnel, tendonitis. They all mean something. And a lot of times, as an ordained minister, I have had the opportunity to speak to people spiritually. I used to be a deacon in a church and all these things. And it was so mind-boggling to see somebody not know why they were in pain, or no doctor could explain what was happening. And when we talk through, because trauma locks up in your body too and manifests as pain and other things too, because it's cellular, So the more people are understanding the biometaphysical parts of us, the more enlightening they can get to take care of themselves holistically. So I'm really into herbs and essential oils, a lot of meditation and prayer, so yoga, because there's so much flexibility, understanding different things about how our bodies are made up. We're literally a system, multiple systems trying to work together. And when one system is out of whack, it starts to send messages to other parts, and that's where we see disease and illness. So that's what my degree will be in, and I specify an approach that speaks to people who are in business, because CEOs and owners of companies that are in leadership capacities tend to be less likely to talk about their stressors, and less likely to move towards a larger or greater goal because of their fear of being seen as vulnerable or broken, or have a story like mine, or something like that. So I really have been focusing on that in the past few years.
Wow, I knew that would be a fascinating answer, and it was. What's intriguing to me too is the way people process trauma, because these memories are stored completely differently from any other memory. They're kind of isolated in their own zone, detached from the rest of the memories, because that's how you keep the bulk of yourself feeling safe. You sort of put everything else in a drawer. Is
Yeah.
that part of your study, or?
Yes, it hasn't, so many things, like, when people say don't flip your lid, I didn't know that was a true thing that's happening in your brain. Like,
Neither do I.
it's literally a part of your brain that is protected up and until the point where you can't take it no more, and it bursts, and it makes sure like a little flap come up in the part of your brain that makes you blow your top. So when you see that movie, like what was the name of that movie where they had all the emotions? I can't remember it, and I love that movie. Oh my gosh. But the movie where they were showing all the emotions and they had anger, and anger's top would blow, like that's literally what's happening in our brain when we do that. And stuff like that is the stuff that I did inside out. Thank you, Eddie. Yes, that to me, when I learned that for the first time, I could not believe that was just the basis of what everything we're seeing. Even computers represent our brains. When you have more, I tell people when I'm doing coaching with some of the people that are in business, when I'm sitting with business owners and I'm saying to them, you have too many tabs open, you can't be present with me. And they're like, what? I said, when you look at your computer, how many tabs do you have open? And they're like, oh, I got about 12, because I got to go back to it and fix that. I said, well, that's how much memory you're holding in your head. Just imagine 12 tabs open in your head of things you got to do. You can't process like that. And you know how a computer crashes, or a computer say I'm running out of memory, or they start getting sluggish because too many things are open? That's the same thing that happens to your body. So it sends messages to tell things to shut down, like literally. My shoulder went out. I had an impingement in my shoulder. And when I went to the physical therapist, he was explaining that the muscle did not die, but I couldn't pick up like a cup. And he was like, yeah, well, your brain tricks your arm and says, you're in pain, it's about to go crazy, so that you will put that down, so that you will stop working that muscle, so it can have time to heal naturally. So the pain wasn't real pain. The pain was a message so that you wouldn't use that muscle. I was like, what? So stuff like that has me looking into it forever. I can like sit in it for hours, but the way that it shows up in our life is amazing, because it really stagnates us. So when we think about that question you said about being stuck, that's literally what's happening. There's so much sluggish memory that's sitting with you that you haven't released, you haven't talked about, you have not felt safe to let go of. So you're not going to go after some of the things you want in life, because you're fearful, and that guilt and shame and stuff shows up. And you're fearful that if somebody finds out that I was molested, if somebody found out that I was abused or raped or dropped out of high school or used to be on welfare, that's the end of me. And they create so much pain and traumatic experience for their body, holding secrets. It creates so much stuff. So our bodies are amazing, and our brains is even more amazing. So
They sure are. To
yeah.
build on your computer analogy, what came to mind, I'm a trauma survivor,
Mm-hmm.
and what came to mind is something sucking up your energy, your memory of the computer, and that is a computer file playing on a loop
Mm-hmm.
of the trauma, and it just keeps playing. So
Right.
if you're aware of it, you're disturbed by the images, and if you're not aware of it, you just feel incredibly slow and sluggish and unhappy, and you're
Yeah.
not sure why.
Yes, that's perfect. See? Yes, Peg, exactly. And that's funny because, people say, well, you got some programs running in the back. You can't see that on your computer. That's probably why it's running like that. Let me clear out some of those cookies or whatever. Yes, this is exactly what our bodies are experiencing. So, metaphysically, you can identify that higher source. We are connected to so many things. That's why people say, go out into nature, and we are connected in ways that we don't understand. Like when we get a chill when we heard a certain song, or when we see a movie, we cry. There's connections that are happening that we can't explain. That's biologically, connected to the brain, neurologically, neuromuscular responses that we have to certain things as a result of this impact of the systems in our body and how they're working or not working. And then you'll see certain diseases and illnesses is related to that stifled condition if it's lasting too long.
Mhm. So given your awareness of trauma and how embedded that is in your thinking and your profession, and then pivoting to your parental role, is it hard? Do you feel like you want to be overprotective of the kids because of
I
that?
used to. I used to, but now I feel more equipped to give examples to them to help them process it. I don't force them to deal with it, but I give them an out. Like if my daughter, some days I know it's just attention. You can always kind of decipher after you see it a few times. But and I'll just say, okay, she needs some attention today, and I'll do that. And I know that her trauma is abandonment. She was taken away from what she knew at 7 months, and at 8 months they're starting to develop healthy attachment, right? So there's things I have to consider, that even though she's 8 now, she still has that connection to that. So if she feels left out, or she feels like somebody's trying to leave her, she doesn't know where people are going, it triggers all these emotions. And if I ask her, why are you feeling, she's crying, I said, why are you crying? She goes, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, well, if you don't know, you know what, that's fine too. Why don't you go sit for a minute and just let it be? It's okay to cry. It's okay to not know. And, if something comes to you, let's come back and talk about it. Let's see what it could be, but I don't let her think that she's not okay to cry, or she's not okay to express herself. Our children all of our children really have had that experience with us. But once we became trauma-informed parents, it changed how we worked with the last three, because now we understood certain behaviors was as a result of something, like something that could have happened outside of the home or in between them in the home that we probably would have, pushed off before, like, go sit down, you know what you're doing. Now it's like, okay, what was that about? Was that something related to something that didn't happen right now? And we took them to, get evaluated if something was going on that we needed to pay attention to. And a lot of parents don't like to do that because they're scared for their children to get labeled or whatever. And I'm like, well, give them options. You don't have to keep them in care, but at least know if there's something going on beyond your control. So no, I don't feel overprotective of them for that. I may be hypervigilant about them being around strangers for safety. That may be where you'll see a little more overprotectiveness, like what is that person doing and why are they talking to you kind of thing. But emotions and feelings and thoughts, we let them express those things. And we talk about hard, difficult conversations and how to properly respond when you're upset, and not what you say, but how you say it. We give them a lot of freedoms to express themselves so that when they get older, they have the proper language to say what's going on with them. Mm-hmm. Instead of just lashing out, which I didn't get that. I would just lash out. I would fight. I would be upset. Nobody would say, well, what's happening with you? And even when we were going through the school systems, when we got down here, one of the programs we did here called Phases, we realized that, as foster parents, some of these children are removed from homes in the middle of the night. And then they may go to the same school the next day and they'll act out, well, they'll have an episode at school. And the first thing is putting them on detention or, penalizing them because they don't know how to use the language to say, I don't know where I'm at. I don't know what happened to my mom, or we were burnt out of our home last night, or my father shot my mom, or they had a fight, or they don't know where to put that. And you want them to just come into school and get to work and follow the rules, but they're still processing something. So we were advocating for there to be like an interventionist in the school system somewhere that when they experience this, they at least know that there's somewhere they can go to start to process that. If they need a minute before class start, even if they don't want to talk about it, they just need a space to sit and think before they go to class, that should be available to them. And teachers need to be informed about that so that they can see when a child, you got 30 kids in the class, you don't always see every child. Granted, I don't expect teachers to be a robot and know everything. But when they see certain behaviors, you'll know that maybe that might be something that went on because this is not like them. Instead of just attacking and saying, get out of my classroom and no, you're going to be suspended. And, it's not fair to those children because they're dealing with some real adult-like situations and nobody is giving them language. Nobody is telling them, okay, you may not know how to express this. So you hit something or you push somebody or you scratch up something or cut yourself or, that's huge. And I don't think our systems and this is why I started the nonprofit. I don't think our systems are prepared for those situations. They don't know how to support those families at that time. Not all schools, some schools, but not all schools.
Mm-hmm. Right. A lot of great points there to unpack. Children who go through those enormous traumas, they don't have the language. They don't have the capacity to deal with it emotionally. They don't have the words or the permission to express what happened to them. They don't know that they need to talk about it. So yeah, they're just flying blind, and I'm so glad that you're helping create systems to deal with that.
Absolutely. That was my story. And I know that that's what I wished for. I wish that I would act the way I acted, hoping that somebody would pay attention to me and ask me what was wrong. And nobody was doing that.
Right. I know with NAMI North Carolina, one of the pillars of our new strategic plan is early intervention and reaching out to youth, trying to get some of these things right. I feel like with my generation, that simply did not happen in most cases because the language, the thought process, the models weren't there. Maybe they were and I didn't know it, but it seems like nobody talked about anything at that point. So I'm glad that there is movement and there is energy and there is commitment to making that change. We're getting pretty close to the end of our program. Do you have any final words of wisdom for us? Something that you've that you want to say or something you want to summarize?
First, thank you again. I always love the opportunity to share my experiences. Not because I think I'm so different from a lot of people, but just because there's so many people that still live in hidden. They don't tell all of what they're experiencing, and they're thinking they're okay. Um, and if you're not okay, if there is something you want to talk about and there is something that you feel stuck with, find someone you trust and start the process. Um, get to the place where you really can fully be yourself and embrace all the pieces that God and life has to offer you. And if you have not connected yourself to something bigger than you in a spiritual way or just in a higher thinking way, that's very helpful, to sit with the idea of, what would it be like if I can create the sky? Like if I was the creator of the sky, what would it look like? Just go beyond today. And especially during COVID, a lot of us don't know we're going into a depressive space. Um, a lot of us don't know that we're sad. We don't know because it's almost becoming normal for us to feel something. Um, Learn how to unplug. Try to find things that you enjoy. Remind yourself, even if you have to put it in stickies all around your house. If you can see my room, I have positive statements everywhere in here because for every one negative thing you hear about yourself or towards you, you need 7 positives to counteract that one negative. So it's so important to put positive affirmations around you or just good energy or bright colors or something that will shift your mood. Look into something that makes you happy, that makes you feel good so that you can begin to heal yourself from within until you find that safe space. That's what I would like to offer to you all.
I cannot think of a better way to close the program. Thank you for your time, for sharing your story. You've always made a lot of comments that resonate with me. You have a way of taking complex ideas and making them sound pretty simple and approachable. And I think just your manner of communicating creates safe spaces. So thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. And thanks to our virtual studio audience. Please tune in next week. We've got Pooja Mehta, who will be talking about her mental health journey and stigma in the South Asian community. That's the 30th. And in August, we've got a whole new lineup of wonderful programming. The first Thursday in August will be back to school. We'll have some of our teachers of our basics class geared to parents whose kids have shown symptoms of mental health challenges before the age of 13. All kinds of wonderful stuff coming up. And thank you again for joining us tonight. 90 minutes have flown by. And I'll give one final shout out to Gary Kreitz and Eddie and his awesome star dog, Ella. So wherever you go from here, be sure to take care of yourself, be safe, go where you need to go, do what you need to do, and stay in that safe space. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Have a
We'll
good
see you
night.
next week.